Right. Would you please turn it off or to silent or any other electronic device? There'll be two opportunities for citizen input. Our consent agenda, which are items 1 through 8, and then new business items 9 through 19. Rules for our commission allow citizens 3 minutes to comment. There's a timing clock on Ms. Spratlin's desk, and there's also one at the podium there that will be yellow at 2.5 minutes. So please have your remarks finished before it turns red at 3 minutes. If you brought handouts for us tonight and you wish to share them, if you'll hand them to Mr. Behrman, he will be happy to make sure that we get them. And before we begin tonight's meeting, I would like to recognize some special citizens. This is the 25th anniversary of our solid waste citizen advisory committee. And today is a special day because it's America Recycles Day. And since this committee was established in January 1991, Athens-Clarke County has been fortunate to have a number of citizens, elected officials, and staff members offer their insight and guidance to our program. And it's a program we're all very, very proud of, and most people think of, identify this more with our recycling than anything else, but it's bigger than that. So tonight I would like to recognize some individuals and ask that they stand as I call their names. And it's a lot of names, but I think this is important enough for everybody to be recognized. First and foremost was Commissioner Charles Carter, and I don't believe he's here tonight, is he? Charles was one of our commissioners, and he chaired the first committee when it began in 1991 until he left office. And those first charter members, and there are not many of them here, and a few of them are deceased now. I'll call out the deceased members that are on the charter group, and then the others at the end here. But Rufus Adair, who was with Athens Banner Herald, many of you probably remember. Sophia Bogue is here. Sophia, would you stand up? Thank you. Charlie Crawford, Laurie Fowler, Steve Humphreys, Vince Lacradera, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, I hope I am, Carl Nichols, Heidi Davison, Jim, and Heidi was mayor prior to me, Jim Dove, Jim Gray, Norman McGlowan, John Bellamy, Angela Coggins, Nancy Deal, Dothel Edwards, Jennifer Lapidus Bennett, Sharon Baker Pickett, Tricia Reynolds, Richard Stone, I thought I saw Richard, Ginger Rutherford, Mike Waldrop, Bob Snipes, Reverend Ben Willis, and Catherine Zimmer. That was the charter committee that started in 1991. Other members through the years have been Ron Evans, Elizabeth Riley, Julia Adkins, Mr. E.C. Pert, Sven Fromke, and if I'm butchering names, I apologize. Jim Trushaw. Thank you, Trottershaw. Skipper Stipmoss, Stipmoss, I believe. Nance Burrell, Jack Meyer, Hugh Bowles, Joe Tichy, Nancy Lindblom, Grayson White, Bob Gregory, Gary Wilson, Dale Gibbons, Blake Edwards, Bill Sheehan. I'm not seeing anybody standing, so I guess Serena Brusco Hood, Betty Garrett, Alan Ford, Mary Burns, Patrick Huey, Gerald Lloyd, Will Sheehan. And the reason I called all these names because I think it's really important for us to stop and think how many volunteers that we have on a day-to-day basis in our government that actually save us a lot of money and make our community better. These are the few committee members that are deceased now, and I would like for us to remember them. Dan Gunnels, Ken Jordan, and Ken was also an ACC commissioner, Alec Little, Fred Loaf, Don Loomis, John McLeod, Maddie Pierman, and I think I've gotten everybody except our current people. Now, if I missed anyone, I apologize. So now I'm pleased to recognize our current committee members. And although the committee is not working on any major changes right now, they still get together to discuss issues and share ideas. So would you please come forward as I call your name and stay here a minute because I think Suki wants us to get some photos. Jared Harper, Michael Bruger, Sharon Dickerson, who is our co-chair, one of the co-chairs, and she was involved in the creation of the committee and were a county employee at the time. Is that right? Yeah. And Commissioner Jared Bailey. So if y'all will come down. There's two more. I don't know why she wants those separate. Okay. Yeah. I haven't forgotten the other two, but I got my instructions from Suki, so I'm trying to do what she asked me to.
We'll put the two Jareds together. Come on.
Yes.
And y'all don't go away. I'm going to add two more people. And then there are two others, Jerry Bowden. And Jerry's been involved in a number of local grassroots environmental efforts, but has continued to be a faithful member of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. So please come forward. And Larry Dendy. And Larry's also heavily involved in a number of community activities. Larry, too, has been a faithful member of this committee and is almost always in attendance. And I'll have to tell you, I've been in Athens almost 50 years, and I think I've been to very few things that are worthwhile in our community that Larry Dandy wasn't part of. So, and these go to.
You are absolutely right.
Oh, absolutely. Still come up and get the photograph with us. Jared? Jared Harper? Michael? This is cute. Sharon? Jared? Oh, I thought it said Jared. Oh, and Jerry Bowden?
You said Jared.
Well, I'm bad about pronouncing things right, too. I'm disappointed. I thought that I might get one just because.
Little Christmas.
But again, thank you all so much. And let's see if we can.
And a group photo here.
Can we
Get back a little bit.
you want us to back up a bit?
All right, I think that's got it. Do it a couple times. The zeros and ones are free. All right. Very
And
good.
again,
you
thank
so
y'all
much.
all so much. So now we'll get back to work. And our first order of business is our agenda setting meeting. And at this would be the time that anyone that would like to speak to us on items 1 through 8 would come forward. Let us know which item you're speaking to. And remember our 3-minute rule. Bye, guys. Thank you again. I apologize, Bob.
It's okay. Are you ready?
We're ready.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Bob Smith, and I'm here tonight on behalf of I'm the owner of 1282 Prince Avenue, and I'd like to speak in regards to item number 8 on your agenda. For quite some time, we've been working on the redesign of this project in order to improve pedestrian access into the building and to improve vehicular circulation within the site. This design revision increases the number of parking spaces available to Normaltown businesses and vastly improves the condition along Yonah, Satula, and Park Avenues by directing the majority of traffic back out onto Prince Avenue. Steve Decker has been most helpful in assisting us in obtaining a variance from GDOT in order to locate a drive on Prince Avenue and suggesting improvements along Yonah Avenue. These improvements have been incorporated into the proposed plan. There has been a concerted effort to remain transparent about the design revision by meeting with all the stakeholders in the immediate area. The owner of the project has worked out an agreement with the business owners to provide much-needed parking in the Normaltown area, and I have met with residents of Yonah Avenue to gain input on the design and foster an open dialogue. Several of you have also been very helpful in fostering a dialogue between your constituents, the owner of the project, and the design team. This hasn't been an easy process, but it's been worth it. And I'm convinced everyone benefits by the approval of this agenda item. Thank you so much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions should any arise.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
My name is John Carlson. I live at 130 Yona Avenue. I wish to speak to item 8 also. We've been very happy that Bob Smith has met with us, and we're very pleased with some of the things that have happened. We still have some worries. We're worried about what happens if the property changes hands. We have sort of a guarantee from the present developer about it. The problem, in a nutshell, you've heard this before, is that Yona Avenue is a substandard road. I mean, it just is. It's got a curve at a place which is sort of at the top of a hill, and you can't see around it. It's too narrow in places. We already have a parking problem with too many people trying to park on Yona Avenue. If you put a lot of traffic on there, it's just going to be horrible. We have people walking the dogs. We have children that live on the area. We just need to keep the traffic off of Yona if at all possible. And we are pleased that the developer has made some concessions here. We would like, as I say, some more guarantees, but on the whole, we support the item 8 in order to keep the traffic off of Yona Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Carlton.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. My name is Dave Parinchu. I live at 170 Yona Avenue, and I too am speaking on item 8, the removal of the Prince Avenue parking spaces. My wife, Jennifer Rice, and I have been in close communication with our neighbors on Yona Ave and the project designer, Bob Smith, about this issue. We're very happy to see that the owner of the property, John Barrett, has commissioned a redesign of the 1282 Prince Avenue Medical Building, for which he is now requesting removal of these Prince Avenue parking spaces to add an egress from the parking deck onto Prince Avenue. As was mentioned in an email earlier to you today from Jennifer, there are a few issues we would like further consideration on as means for the residents to fully support the project redesign and thereby the removal of the parking on Prince Avenue. Number one, it is critical to note that in the redesign, Mr. Barrett plans to open the parking deck up to the public for parking. So this will essentially become a public pay-for-parking structure with an associated restaurant, thereby increasing total traffic volume and changing traffic patterns to have nights and weekend parking available. This is a significant change to the entire project, which will dramatically change the volume of traffic, potentially change the volume of traffic on Yona. Number two, there are now 2 ingress and egress points to the parking garage that connect to Yona. There is a gate to the bottom floor of the deck and also a gate that connects to the middle floor of the deck that include ingress and egress onto Yona. This issue, combined with the one I just mentioned, means that control of access into and out of these 2 gates is of critical importance to the residents who live on Yona Avenue. If gate access is not controlled on nights and weekends, we will have a much worse traffic situation than originally acknowledged by the previously permitted project. We are very encouraged to have received a letter from Mr. Barrett this afternoon stating his intention to close these gates on nights and weekends. We look forward to your thoughts on how to formalize that in terms of implementation and enforceability. Number 3, the new plan, as far as we understand, includes right turn only from the 2 driveways that connect to Yona Avenue. It is critical that we ensure that this is completed with the final project so that traffic is directed to Park Avenue and away from Satula, which currently has major traffic issues. Thank you all for your close attention to this issue, and we're hopeful that there is a new spirit of cooperation between the property owner and the residents. We look forward to your ideas on how to ensure that these design elements are realized in the final implementation and operation of the project. And as always, we strongly encourage the careful review of existing policy codes and ordinances to improve our planning procedures so that these kinds of conflicts do not arise in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dave, and I apologize. I didn't want to butcher your last name. Grangio. I'm bad at that. Anyone else? Anyone else wish to speak to us on the consent agenda? We'll come back behind the rail now. Is there any commissioner that would like to remove something? Ms.
I'd like to remove number 6, number 7, and number 8, please.
6. Okay. Anyone else?
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
Madam Mayor. And actually, this would be for the manager's office, I guess. Normally, a request like a change in a plan that number 8 represents would be presented to us by staff, helps us understand it a little better. Is there a plan to do that, or?
No, there's currently not a plan to go into this agenda item in more detail than what's already being presented this evening.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so now we'll go back to our public for comment on items, on the rest of our agenda, which are items 9 through 19. So if you want to comment on something, please tell us which item you're speaking to. And again, remember our 3-minute rule.
Hi, my name is Chris Dowd. I live at 245 North Harris Street, and I'd like to comment on item 13, the West Hancock and Harris all-way stop. I definitely support this. So I think maybe it was even a request that I made, which is kind of a cool feeling. So, so it'll really help when I'm walking to cross that road, and also when I'm biking and I'm coming home from downtown, for example. Tonight, I'm taking a left there. That'll help me do that easier. And when I'm in my car, it'll help me when I'm leaving Harris and taking a left onto Hancock. It'll help a lot because a lot of times cars go a little too fast. Even though it's up a hill, they're still, because you can't see it all, and so it's a little too fast sometimes. So I'm afraid of getting rear-ended there. So yes, I just wanted to say thank you, and that's really it.
Thanks, Chris. Bikers need to remember to stop, too.
Good evening, Mayor, Commission, staff. Tim Denson, 290 Midway Road. I wanted to speak to item 10 first, the agreement between University of Georgia and Athens Transit. Always glad to see the partnership between Athens Transit and UGA Transit strengthening. And I think this might just be a good time for us to be looking into negotiating a similar agreement with Athens Tech. We have this agreement with UGA. It's been very beneficial to them and to us. Same thing with Piedmont. But there is not one with Athens Tech. I know it's been pursued a few years back. It did not go through, but I think this might be a very good time for us to start looking into it again. And while we're at it, further pursue and look into similar agreements with neighboring communities such as Madison County, Oconee County, and Watkinsville. Especially with SPLOST ramping up, this is a great time to be doing that. I also want to speak to item 19. The Mayor's Commission's goals and objectives for the budget. A lot of great stuff here. I want to commend y'all for the great work that you did, Mayor, Commission, staff. A lot of good stuff here. Under the Healthy, Livable, Sustainable ACC, I liked a lot of what I saw. It would also be great to see an effort to fund again, to go about trying to find a green building ordinance to be put in place here in Athens-Clarke County. I think it's something we need, and I think it fits perfectly in that category. Also, transportation, mobility, and connectivity. I love the focuses here are great priorities. For the 2 additional routes, I personally recommend, and also the transit study recommends, focusing first and foremost on US 29, a lot of mobility impaired communities there, the VA clinic, also, of course, driver services. And then the other one I'd like to see and push forward would be on 441 Newton Bridge Road. There's been great demand there for years and years and years. Also glad to see the 30-minute routes expansion there, too. On just going to keep going down the list. Economic prosperity, good stuff there too. But I would like to see more focus on programs and initiatives that work towards equity, so we can help overcome some of the great inequalities that are here. It's great that we're pursuing economic development across the county, but we need to remember that there are great inequalities here that need to be battled too. And then on the informed and engaged community, the good transit marketing that needs to happen. That was also part of the transit study. Glad to see that. I didn't like the ideas of the TVs. I think it's a bit of a waste of money, a bit of a waste of effort. There's better ways we could be doing that. And then on the last one, accountable, responsive government. I got through this in less than 3 minutes, guys. Look at that. Haven't got the light on there. I'm going to be a broken record here, and I'm going to preach again about the need for cameras and recording in the Dougherty Street building. I don't have all the time in the world, though sometimes I try to act like I do, and I'd like to know what's going on in those meetings, and I can't unless I'm in that room. And that speaks for, I guarantee you, hundreds, if not thousands of people in this community. That needs to be a priority. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Denson.
My name is Jim Warrens, and I want to speak on items 15, 16, and 17, and I'm actually here at the invitation of the manager's office to address you about these 3 items. First off, I want to apologize for any confusion that's in the agenda items. While it has Rob Trevino's name on it, I wrote a lot of that, and in getting ready to come tonight, reading back over it, I realized I could have done a whole lot better job in making it clear what we were talking about, and so I apologize for that. Prior to 2006, public housing authorities in the state of Georgia had an absolute right of condemnation, exactly the same as any other governmental entity. However, after the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Kelo versus City of New London, which upheld the right of eminent domain for economic development, almost every state legislature in the country reformed its eminent domain law. Georgia made a number of changes to its eminent domain law, many of them having to do with notice and with protection of the rights of people whose property was being condemned. But one of the changes that they made is that housing authorities throughout the state, while they still retain their right to condemn properties, they have to come before the governing authority, whether it's a city or a county, in this case the unified government, to have that action approved. In 2006, I made a similar presentation to what I'm making tonight. We had a flurry of them before the economic recession set in. And then since that time, we've had one back in 2014 that was on your consent agenda, which I appreciate. But the change in Georgia law, as I said, provides that public housing authorities have to have the approval of the governing authority. And the purposes, they can only condemn for what's called now public use. And public use is defined in the statute. And then there's about 6 different items underneath it, but the ones that pertain to this are acquisition of property where the title is clouded and the remedy of blight. The housing authority has a program of building affordable housing for low-income persons in this community. It allows persons to become first-time homeowners. The down payment is provided by federal funds through the home program. So, and those home funds do not have to be repaid so long as the owner or his direct descendants remain as residents in the home. If they sell the home, if they refinance, if they move away, then those funds have to be paid back. Since 2006, Athens Housing Authority has requested approval for what it considers to be non-adversarial condemnation.
Jim, I'm not going to call time on you because we need to hear all this.
Thank you.
Finish.
And I'm halfway through, so I'm moving. The properties it acquires are usually vacant lots or properties with substandard housing. The last one that we did in 2014, there was a dilapidated house. There was a 1970s single-wide mobile home on the property that was not inhabitable. Of the 3 that are on the current agenda, 2 of them were vacant, in which the property owners approached the Athens Housing Authorities and said, will you buy these properties for, I think it's $2,500 a piece. The problem is that those were tax sale properties. Tax sale does not convey marketable title. And the only way a tax sale can be converted to marketable title is to go through a judicial proceeding. And there's 2 choices. You can file an action to quiet title, or the housing authority, of course, has the authority to condemn, and that's just a simpler, easier way to go about doing it than an action to quiet title. The other property is located at 1000 West Henderson Extension. Those folks are in default on their mortgage. Again, they came to the housing authority and said, can you help us out? Property's on the market, it's listed with a realtor. Negotiated with the first mortgage lender to try to accomplish a short sale. The problem is that the existing mortgage loan that's out there was done in-house by a predecessor of the current mortgage holder. They apparently did not get a title search. There's an outstanding security deed. So they're really in second position as far as priorities are concerned. So they won't go through with the short sale because clear title can't be conveyed. On the other hand, they can't foreclose either until they get that squared away. Now, we're still working, trying to get that straightened out. If I can get that security deed canceled, then we can cancel the condemnation and not have to go through with it. But this is a perfect example of the kind of title problems that we deal with. So we do have another one in process that'll be before you in another month. It'll be at the January meeting. And it also involves a tax deed, and it also requires there's a break in the chain of title with ownership. What the Housing Authority does is they order title searches up front. And if we got a clear title, then obviously we contract with the people and we move forward. If we don't have a clear title, then again, non-adversarially working with the property owner who wants to get their money out of it. And a lot of times these involve estates where you've got multiple people all over the country that we've got to try to figure out who they are and how much their share is. But the system provides a way in which they have notice, have an opportunity to be heard, held by a special master who looks through all the issues, somebody that's well-versed in real estate that the judge appoints, and then he makes a report to the judge. At each stage, the homeowner has the right to come before whichever body and raise whatever objections, whatever questions and so on they want to. But of all of the ones that I've done for the Housing Authority, Rick just insists that these be non-adversarial, which I agree with, and so it's always done as a collaborative process, but we got to have your approval. And so that's what items 15, 16, and 17 are on the agenda for. And I would ask again that they be moved to the consent agenda. That would still give, the property owner has the right to come to the meeting. We have to give him notice of the meeting on December the 6th. And the notice is three ways. It gets posted just like a rezone. It gets advertised in the local newspaper. And they also get actual written notice. There's a stack of stuff that I have to send them, part of which is prepared by the Department of Community Affairs, which again is ordained by the statute. I'll be glad to answer any questions that any of you have about this process.
Thank you, Jim, and I appreciate you coming too.
Okay, glad to do it. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address the commission?
Good evening. My name is Mary Parrish. I'm representing a local landscape architecture planning firm as to item number 9 under new business. We compiled the local historic district designation for West Rutherford Street, right off of Moreland Avenue in town, and I just want to express the amount of community support that there is for this designation to go through. It was as a result of a attempted demolition permit that local community members on West Rutherford Street expressed a desire to have local district designation to protect their historic resources and create a local historic district. Being the person who compiled the district designation and filled out the survey, I spoke to a lot of the local residents of that street, and they all expressed a keen interest in this project going through and a lot of support of it. Additionally, the Athens-Clarke Heritage Foundation has also been a great help in compiling the research that it took to make this report. And they also are very eager to see that it moves to the consent agenda, hopefully. So I'm here to answer any questions if need be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll come back behind the rail, and we'll start with item number 6, which Ms. Link wanted to remove. So would you like to start that for us?
Yeah, this is our annual LMIG grant funding, pavement maintenance funds that we get from GDOT. And I just had a couple inquiries from constituents asking more questions about them. You know, when we do these repaving projects, it's an opportunity to incorporate some more pedestrian or crosswalk or bike infrastructure. So I'd just like to leave this off the agenda to give folks some time to digest it some more and take a better look at the list. For some reason, I'm not able to access it right now, but I did take some notes. So, folks, I just want to give folks a chance to take a closer look and maybe comment on it at our voting session.
We'll keep that on the discussion agenda. Number 7, you asked for that one too. you like to?
Yeah, the home funds to Athens Land Trust. Of course, this is great. I mean, the Athens Land Trust does so much good work in our community, especially when it comes to affordable housing. And I just wanted to voice my concerns about the need for funding to go to some existing housing in our traditional in-town neighborhoods to preserve some of the affordable housing within those neighborhoods. You know, we are seeing a lot of gentrification, and I went with a handful of other citizens, including representatives from the Land Trust, to a conference, a purpose-built communities conference in Birmingham a couple weeks ago. And we looked at how some other communities are dealing with these, and they have some great programs when it comes to grant funding for existing homeowners to fix up their homes, as well as funding to help fix up vacant properties to turn them into affordable rental housing, and whereas the owners of those properties could also benefit from those rentals. So I'm hoping in the future we can explore some of those solutions. We're not talking a whole lot about affordable housing in our existing neighborhoods, and I'm hoping we can focus on that before all our existing in-town neighborhoods become completely unaffordable, because they are changing quite rapidly. So I just want to put that out there, and I'm happy to put it back on the agenda.
Okay. Put that back on consent.
Yeah, the consent agenda, sorry.
Okay, and item number 8.
Yeah, I definitely want to leave this off the consent agenda, because I know that there might be more folks speaking about it, and there's still a few questions that have to be answered about the agreement that the developer has with the Yonah Avenue residents. There's concerns about transferability of that agreement should the property be sold in the future. I want to give a shout out to Bob Smith. He's always a delight to work with, and thank you for reaching out and being so open. And I think this redesign, could be really great for the entire area. We're going to see a smaller footprint, a building with a smaller footprint, which kind of gives a little more air and is more in scale with the existing buildings. And if things go as planned, it should divert a lot of that traffic, most of the traffic, onto Prince Avenue. And there's 5 parking spaces that would need to go, but the agreement to offer additional parking is great. There's a tremendous need for parking in Normaltown, and I think it could, provide that need and hopefully increase some of the business there. The building is also talking about a restaurant space, which could bring even more activity to the area. And by opening up that streetscape, there could be room for a crosswalk and moving the bus stop. There were some problems with the current location of the bus stop in Normaltown, so this could be a first step towards, some really positive improvements in the area, and I'm hoping that, we can assure that that agreement with the existing neighbors on Yonah Avenue can be worked out, and that everybody can be reassured that the traffic patterns will be as safe as possible.
Thank you. Well, if you had not asked for this to be taken off, I was going to, because I wanted to get our attorney to clarify, because I don't want anyone to be under misperceptions about what can and cannot be done. And will you talk about the county's ability to enforce these agreements, Bill?
Yes, I've looked at the agreement, and I do not think there's any enforceable right by the county to enforce parking in that facility. And it's something that could be revoked by the owner, the way I read it. It's not something that's permanent. I don't see it as being something that would be automatically transferred if the property was sold. Of course, the parties could agree to continue that relationship, but I think it's revocable, and I think the government doesn't have any enforcement rights in it.
Let's see who hasn't spoken. Mr. Gertz, and I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm glad to see some kind of additional thought given to the design, and I met with Mr. Smith earlier today to talk about some aspects of that design. I mean, obviously, simply having egress onto Prince Avenue versus directing all the egress onto Yonah is going to be an enormous benefit to the neighborhood. Haven't been in that neighborhood quite a bit. I have a lot of friends who live there, and 3 years I drop Noah off every day about 100 yards from there. I do want to make the observation that I think the project could be as strong as possible if both of those egress points onto Yona directed all traffic to the right to Park Avenue rather than to Satula, where I think as one of the speakers mentioned earlier, there's always just quite a bit of congestion. The other thing that I think would make for a very strong project is just indication that that lower, topographically lowermost entrance is not public access, which it's intended for employees. But all of that leads me sort of back to the direction that you were going, Madam Mayor, which is to Attorney Berryman. So, Bill, obviously, we can't regulate a private contract between two parties. Does our potential willingness to remove on-street parking give us the hinge by which we could also have some impact on the site design?
I guess only if the way it's structured, this is simply a request to remove the parking spaces. It's not associated with any planning action or permit approval. Permits have already been approved. Now, they can be amended, but that would be a matter of there's no zoning action involved, so there would be no mayor and commission involvement in that sort of change.
So any design considerations would be contingent upon the applicant's willingness to do that, but couldn't be something that we could base our final vote on.
Yes, again, I don't know that there's any enforceable mechanism there. It's not like it's connected with the zoning where you can withhold a permit. I don't think there's any enforceability associated with that.
Okay.
Ms. Wright.
Yeah, and I'm kind of piggybacking on Commissioner Bailey's question about not having the typical back and forth that we have with Brad on the details. I do have some questions, and I'll send an email to Mr. Smith, and it's really about the different ways to get in and out of the parking deck as it's designed and the ramps in between them. And I'll just, instead of trying to articulate that here, I'll send an email and then share it with you guys, because you might also wonder about when you come in one way, if you have to come back out that way. But I did want to share my enthusiasm for the progress that was made with GDOT and Steve Decker working on this so that we have this option in front of us that we didn't have earlier for coming and going out of Prince, even though it would be, I think, a right in only and not a left onto it. Is that understood? Is there a left in? But anyway, so I'll get that taken care of. And I guess for the attorney to clarify too, when we're speaking about 10 spots being public parking, that is also just a gentleman's agreement. It's not something that we can monitor, put meters on, or do anything with as far as someone donating parking spaces. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, there is no easement granted to the government. There's no right for the government to enforce parking there, to put meters up. That's not the case.
Or to turn the lights out at a certain time, or
That's
to
right.
monitor who's coming and going at what time.
And that just causes a whole host of issues about liability and rights and things like that it would be pretty unprecedented for government to get involved with that.
Yeah, well, I guess what I'm saying is we stop at the property line.
Right.
And what's being offered within the property's boundaries is simply being offered, and we can't tie it into the parking.
That's correct.
What we're being asked for. Thank you.
And Ms. Wright, just for a point of information, we got an updated parking agreement, and it had 15 spaces instead of 10. But Ms. Link.
The plan that's attached to the agenda report, is that the plan that's been approved through planning, and that's what they're beholden to move forward with? 'Cause it shows the little pork chop at the Yona entrance mandating a right, or the Yona exit mandating a right only egress.
Yeah, this is a plan that our staff has reviewed and has worked with the developer on. So It hasn't officially been submitted to planning, but I mean, it's what we've been discussing with the developer
So that
about.
plan isn't necessarily set in stone yet?
My understanding is that's correct.
Okay. And as far as this agreement to, close egress or access to the deck from Yona after hours and on weekends, the government would have nothing to do with that agreement. We'd have no means of enforcing it or being involved in that agreement in any way. But if it were a civil agreement between two private parties, then they would have the option, if it were broken or not transferred or whatever, they would have the option to pursue it in civil court, correct? What's your opinion on that, Bill, as far as the legality and their chances of...
I really don't want to hazard a guess. I mean, it would be a very complex commercial agreement, and it would not involve the government, so I think that would be between the attorneys for the parties to decide that.
Okay, so you suggest there be an attorney agreement between the parties to assure that remains, because as was pointed out, this is great. This, as has been proposed, solves, probably 85% of the problem that was being presented by this project. But if there's no guarantee that that limited access is in perpetuity, it could bring a lot worse problems, because they are proposing to add a restaurant, which would mean that there would be nighttime and weekend activity and increased. I think the original traffic study noted about 800 cars per day that would be directed onto Yona. And, if you add a restaurant in there and those egresses were to remain open, it could exacerbate the conditions even worse. And if there is no guarantee, then, it could be even worse. So I'm just trying to find an out here on how these folks can, and the business owners too, as well, who have this agreement in hand for those 15 parking spaces in the deck, I believe. I'm just trying to find an out as to what they can do, what their next step is to ensure that there's some guarantee that this will exist in perpetuity.
I think Mr. Hiss had something for us on that.
Yeah, just to follow up on one of your previous questions, Commissioner Link, about the right out at the on Yona, is that this is kind of a chicken or the egg type situation, and really they can't submit their final plan until the removal of the parking spaces is approved.
Mm-hmm.
But so their plan that's on file at the planning department is still the original design, but as you can see from this agenda item, this is what it's essentially going to look like.
There's a new design.
If the parking spaces, the removal of the parking spaces is approved.
Okay.
That's really contingent upon, that's what makes this development and this change work, is the approval of removal of the parking spaces.
Well, I think there just needs to be more communication amongst the nearby property owners about that agreement, and they might need an attorney to have some input on it.
I think that's a private situation, though, that we cannot and should not be involved
Yeah,
in.
at this point, this is, this parking question exists outside the project itself, and the project is by right.
And I think it's a goodwill thing that, hopefully we've got trustworthy people. So, who is first?
Bill.
Ms. Bell.
I've been involved with this in a different way since the beginning of my run as taking the commission role. My interest has been in all of the above. The people on Yona, I certainly was involved with initially. I also have been indirectly involved with the developer, and because I have been concerned from the very beginning of my coming on this commission, is we have had a reputation of not being business friendly. I think we've worked on that a great deal, and I want us to continue to do that. But my concern with this, as the developer has leaned over backwards, he's changed directions, he's gone back and gone to the drawing board again and again, trying to appease and do what we want them to do. My first comment would be the people on Yona, when they bought their properties, knew that property that some development's going to go on, is going to have to be used for commercial in some way or the other. And when I look at what this option can be versus what it could be in a situation located like Normaltown, it could be some other things that could be a lot more contentious. I feel like the developer has leaned over backwards also to address the traffic to the right. That's what they had wanted, and I don't blame them. If I was a landowner there, I would be in that line also. But I feel like we need to be mindful that we need to look at the broad picture of what we're asking. We're asking for the parking spaces. GDOT is cooperating with that, which I wasn't sure that would happen when this was first developed into the beginning stages. But they have fulfilled that promise, I think, once we move forward with this. But I want us to be conscious of the fact that we need to look at the whole picture and know we've got to do what's best for all parties concerned and keep that as our primary focus. I want it to be what's best for the community, for the neighborhood. There's a whole lot of changes that are going to be going there. But I also know that there's been the cooperation to give parking to the community and to also make the access with the gates and things that would make it safer. The first thing I thought about when I heard the gates mentioned was the fact that that keeps anyone that would come in after dark and go in if there was not a gate preventing that makes it more safe. So there's so many different areas that I've looked at. I've been looking over it for over a week now with a new proposal, and I want us to all be conscious of all the different areas that we need to look at and keep it as much as we need to do for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I understand that we're not being asked to approve the plans. We're just being asked to approve removal of some parking spaces. And having spent a lot of time in Normaltown, a lot of those parking spaces, it's a little dangerous pulling out of them. So what I would like to request from the manager's office is some sort of report from our traffic engineer or transportation public works just about the safety of removing those. It might not be any problem, but I just would like to hear staff's viewpoint on the safety aspect. Because those spaces in general are a little scary sometimes because people are moving very quickly and you're backing out of a space. So just like to make that request. Thank you.
So I want to be clear about what we're being asked to do and what we're not being asked to do. Correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, if you would. We're being asked to remove these 6 parking spaces. We're not being asked to approve a plan.
That's
Is that correct?
That
so
is
this
correct.
plan is here just to give us context, but we have no authority over this plan. We can't amend it. We can't force changes to it. We're just being asked to remove 6 parking spaces. Is that right?
That is correct, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? Okay. We'll move on to item number 9. Thank you. Well, kind of lost my place where we're. And this is West Rutherford Street historic designation. Would you like to speak to that, Mr. Hamby?
I don't really have much to say. I know the neighbors around there are looking forward to it, and I appreciate Ms. Parrish coming tonight to speak on it. And I will leave it off consent though, just in case somebody wants to. Sure. And also, I think we have a public hearing on it, so I think that needs to stay off consent anyway.
Yeah,
so,
good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
And I appreciate staff's help with this too, Mayor.
Did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if the photo quality on page 78 of the document, maybe it's some of Mike's artwork that's in there, but it's like diced up and you can't really tell what's going on. So if you guys could just check on that photo, we need to have accurate pictures in there, not Mike's artistic rendition.
Well, that's what I was going to say. He's using.
But that would be on 78.
He's using artistic license.
Yeah. Anyway.
Ms. Dickerson.
Well, two things. First of all, you'll on page 47 of the PDF, item 6, that I notified the manager today. I think that date's wrong. The third line, it should say September 21st, 2016, not 2006, just so everybody knows. The other thing I have a question about, and I know we haven't had a lot of these necessarily, and I haven't had any experience with this, but I did have a question. And I did ask the manager's office about it today. And the main question was, according to the report, only a third of the people responded. So 5 out of 15 property owners responded. And I think there was only one negative and two positive or there was one negative and four positive, I guess. And my only question is, I know we have thresholds for neighborhoods that want to have speed humps. It seems odd to me that we would allow something like this to go down without having more than a third of the people approve it. And I mean, that's just me. I don't have experience in this. I just think it sounds kind of odd, and we don't have any threshold. So I guess I'd like a little bit better understanding about why. I mean,
is there anybody here that feels that they can answer that?
We'll say this, just as part of the historic designation process that we've used in the past, it's always been from the standpoint of who's turned it in, and if you haven't turned it in, we take that as an agreement. I think it used to work different. I think they used to put it down as a no if you didn't turn it in, but that's changed. Am I right, Commissioner Sims? That's so we changed it also to not include Yeah, you have to actively sort of voice your opinion on it.
Opposition had to be voiced, otherwise it was assumed.
But I will say this, and I spoke to Planning Director Griffin about this as well, and he mentioned to me that actually this percentage is a lot higher than on some other projects, not necessarily historic designation projects, right? Am I right?
Yeah, and I asked Brad the same exact question. I mean, we've had more participation than 33%, but we've had a lot less participation for some of our designated districts as well. So this is right in line with it represents 5 of the 15 parcels, and only have one negative comment, and that really didn't say anything other than just it was negative. Just check the box.
Was that one of the responses that we counted, though, a negative?
Yes.
So we had, what's the method of notification? Is it?
I mean, it's via mail, of course, in terms of the survey, but, there is other public input opportunities there's been several public input opportunities, quite frankly, throughout this whole process. And so it's, and there's lots of opportunities to learn and voice their opinions.
And Mayor, I know I received at least 3 letters. I don't think I received any more than that about the public input sessions and the survey and such as that.
So, but we don't do like certified mail or anything so that we know for sure that people got notification.
No, it says item 4.
And we discussed that during the designation when you put it in committee about that, and I think there was some. I think the expense associated with it was something that we looked at.
That's correct. We do not send it certified mail. I mean, it's really just a voluntary survey just to help engage opinion and help inform the commissioners to make a decision. I mean, it's really just for information purposes. So.
I just want to get all the questions and answers on the table. Ms. Lane.
Yeah, I just have a couple of procedural questions about how this came about. This is a neighborhood that was not designated a National Historic District until 2007, and the initial moratorium was enacted in 2015 and at one point extended to now, November 2016, so about a year and a half worth of moratorium. I'm just curious as to what would trigger, what is the trigger factor to enact that moratorium? I've made requests for moratorium on National Register Historic District in my own district, and very few seem willing to support it. So I'd like to know what trigger would actually garner support for a moratorium for a National Register Historic District, so this kind of process could be pursued or some other kind of protective measures could be pursued. Especially in a neighborhood where demolitions have already been taking place.
And Mayor, maybe I can help shed some light on that. And this is actually not a demolition or not a moratorium for a National Historic District, but rather a local historic district. It's already part of a National Historic District, and it was a demolition permit had been requested. And as part of our demolition delay process, you can request up to 90 days moratorium, and I did that. For this neighborhood at the behest of some of the neighbors around there. The neighbors then, during that 90-day period, gathered and put forth a signed petition. I think it was maybe 10 out of the 15 residents, if I remember correctly, signed that petition, passed along to the Keith Campbell was the one who resident on the street, who's the one who initiated that, passed it along to the mayor and commission so that they could determine what steps would be taken. And if y'all want me to bring out the chart of the demolition delay process, I'll be glad to. But as part of that process, at the end of that 90 days, if further action is warranted, then this mayor and commission has the option of extending that moratorium. And based on the letter that we received from the residents asking for a study of historic designation, the moratorium was extended. And that's where we are today. The study has been finished, and it's up to us to decide whether or not it will be part of one of our new local historic districts.
So a petition from residents would be enough to gain support for a moratorium in a National Register Historic District to pursue this kind of...
That's not what I said. I said that they were asking for, there was a demolition permit that was been requested, and just because it's in a National Historic District, I wish the significance of being in a National Historic District meant a lot more than it does. But the significance comes when you want to be in a local historic district, and that's what the demolition delay asks for, if you want to be in a local historic district, not necessarily a national historic district.
No, I mean, the neighborhood I'm talking about it's been designated National Historic District since 1988. So I'm just wondering, the appropriate process for moving forward to get that moratorium so we can take that breath and that step and look back and decide if this neighborhood does want to move forward with local designation or some other protective measures. So I'm just wondering if what we need is a petition for this neighborhood.
I don't think that's something that can be answered on the floor tonight.
I believe, and Mike or Bill or somebody can correct me, that the way this process went, there was a permit for a demolition. Mike put in the 90-day delay. Then the moratorium was for that demolition. Right?
No, the moratorium was on the area to be designated, but it was a result of the demolition delay.
Right.
And the process was started during that 90 days.
The moratorium was caused by, was invoked because of the demolition permit. Was that part of the demolition permit process or the delay process? Was the moratorium on the entire neighborhood?
I should have brought my chart. The demolition delay process is if a property within a national, or if it's 50 years or older, and if a demolition permit is pulled, then as commissioners we have an opportunity to look at it and to talk with some of the people that we represent in the area. So if it's determined that more work is needed, then a commissioner can approve up to a 90-day moratorium on that specific And in this case, the residents and the neighbors around there determined that we would like to ask the question, could we become a local historic district? And at that point, they did a study, or at that point, we said, okay, now we'll include the moratorium to include all of the 15 properties.
So we voted to include the neighborhood in a demolition moratorium?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
to answer the question, do you want to be in a local historic district?
To answer the question,
but the process started during the 90 days.
Yes, ma'am.
For the historic designation.
Which was the whole point of our demolition delay ordinance.
And
to allow that.
I think that was why it was created in the first place. It was before I came in, but that was my understanding.
Yes, ma'am.
But I don't think we can answer on specific future things that might come before us an absolute answer here behind the rails.
So let me continue. So a petition from a neighborhood to establish a moratorium for demolition of that neighborhood could be that petition could come to us for our consideration without the demolition moratorium on a specific property. It can come for any reason.
Well, yeah, there's not a limit on why you could have a moratorium.
So it so happens that there was a demolition moratorium on one piece of property, and the neighborhood responded by asking for a moratorium on demolition of the entire neighborhood.
So that they could
pursue the demolition against that one property wasn't necessary for them to do that.
That's correct.
That's correct. That's correct.
But the other thing I will point out is that historic designation on any historic areas in Athens can be started at any time. You don't have to wait until a property's about to be torn down. It doesn't have to be a emergency thing. It can be. Yeah.
Thank you. So much for me not saying a whole lot tonight, huh?
You didn't have a thing to say. Anything else on this before we move forward? Okay, we will now go to item number 10, which is University of Georgia and ACC's transportation contract for our transit system. Anybody have anything to ask or Mr.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a question. So on page 264 of the PDF, under 2B, I'm going to read this sentence, and then I'm going to ask our staff if they can explain to me what it means. So it says that the transportation agreement is proposes a transportation agreement as a one-year contract, allows for the following. And under Part B, it says the discount for intra-campus ridership of 15% of the average number of university riders on the bus for the 3-year period described above at 50% of the best bulk discounted adult fare. Maybe I'm the only one, but I don't understand what that means.
Make you feel better, I asked the same question earlier.
Okay. So. As Denzel Washington says in Philadelphia, explain it to me like I'm a 4-year-old.
All right. I gotta rethink my answer.
If I were
now.
talking to Hamby, it would be a 3-year-old.
So the way this works is that when we established the inter-campus ridership, it was established that 15% of the amount of riders in the entire transit system are university riders. So if you look at the million of transit systems of the overall ridership, 15% of them are University of Georgia students or affiliates. And what we've worked on is that due to the short length of the trips that are performed, since they're within the core campus, it's a 50% discount on the rate for that particular trip.
So where did this 15% number come from? Because they swipe their UGA card to ride the bus, and
yeah,
is that based on those data, or
it was based on data that was collected with survey when this contract was established several years ago. Now going back 5-6 years ago, there's extensive survey data that was performed on ridership information when people were coming on and off the bus, and that's how we arrived at the 15% and coordinating that with the university. So the 15% is based on a survey of ridership.
Years ago? That seems like a really low number.
Well, remember, this is ridership on our transit system, on Athens Transit, on our buses. So, of course, this does not count for UGA students on UGA buses.
I have the same concerns you do, Andy. And Mr. Gertz.
I guess I've followed this for a number of years and maybe want to try and help to clarify a little bit further. So we know exactly year in, year out what proportion of the overall Athens Transit ridership is UGA affiliate. That would be students, faculty, or staff. And it's closer to 60% of the overall ridership is students, faculty, or staff. I believe not this negotiation that's in front of us now, but during the prior negotiation, UGA, in their own interest, obviously recognized that some of those trips on Athens Transit vehicles involved getting on campus and getting off on campus. And so the 15% number are the number of those UGA riderships trips that they believe both get on and get off on campus. So that's what they were referring to as intra-campus trips. So get on the stadium, at the stadium, for example, and get off at the science library, a couple stops down. And so for that proportion, 15% of their payment, they want a 50% discount is essentially what we're talking about here. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit.
Well, they were better negotiators than we were on that contract. So,
Can I just?
Yes, sir.
I got two follow-up questions then. Is it possible, because I know that UGA-related people, when they get on our bus, they swipe their ID. So rather than based upon a survey from however many years ago, at some point, is it possible to get real data? And the second question is, if somebody gets on our bus at the Tate Center and gets off at the Arch, does that count as an intra-campus ride, or does that count as coming from campus, off campus?
I think we'd probably have to get back with you on that exactly, with that exact answer, that exact scenario. I mean, it's basically the core campus. I would think it is, but I'd have to get back on that exact example.
And I guess likewise, if somebody gets on the bus at, I got to think what the UGA routes are now, but on the main campus and goes out to the health sciences campus, that's not an intra-campus ride, correct?
That's correct. The health science campus and other UGA affiliated facilities off of College Station Road would be another example. That is not considered intra-campus.
anybody else want to talk about that? Okay, let's move on.
It'll stay on discussion.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. 11, Office of Operational Analysis Work Plan. Would any of our commissioners like to speak to this, or would you like to have Ms. Maddox speak to us?
I would be in full agreement for this to go on consent agenda.
Okay.
If anybody has any questions from the audit committee or
I have a question.
anything.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm not on the audit committee, so if the audit committee wants to ask
But you used to
questions.
be, so come on.
I used to be. So I don't necessarily have a problem with this, but I do have a question. So on page 276 of the PDF, it talks about the work plan performing a risk-based assessment for all Athens-Clarke County departments and agencies to assist in determining the priorities of the internal audit activity. And could somebody explain to me what that means?
I'll get started with it, and that some other committee members can chime in. This is actually something that has been worked on over the last 2 years or more. The survey that would go to department heads, potentially constitutional officers, charter officers, to get a snapshot of their department to help us determine what would be a department's risk factor or details about it to help us decide what's the next department that we want to have on the audit work plan to perform an audit on. Sharon, if you want to, or Jared, anybody else wants to chime in?
I was going to say that one of the other reasons for this tool is it also helps to see if the department is doing the proper planning for succession. If they're promoting people to the level and getting the training in case the director, as we've had recently, several senior members of our staff have retired. So that's part of it too. That's the risk assessment for the department as a whole.
Additionally, if I may, it's been worked on, and it wasn't ready to put in the work plan right now for us to decide what would be the next project. And we do still have projects that aren't completed, as well, like leisure services as an example, so that we're hoping that feedback, when this assessment tool has been refined and ready to go out, will help the audit committee decide what would be the next thing to possibly amend this work plan in July, if everything's wrapped up, to see what department would be be addressed with this. And of course, that would come back to the mayor and commission as well, and take a little bit of the subjectivity out of it for the audit committee to have a consistent way of looking at the departments versus maybe somebody. We had a discussion at one point, I guess 2 years ago, about why was this department coming forward if they had been done recently, and we just want to make an objective assessment as to the time involvement for everybody.
I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I think I was just thrown by the term a risk-based assessment. That wasn't really clear to me what that
We
meant.
could send you a draft of what we have now, so you can get an idea of the questions.
I trust you.
Okay, very good.
Andy, I heard a little bit of the discussion when they were doing it, and I took it as to be a sort of an analysis of the departments to give you an idea of which ones need to be next in line. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a specific reason that you want to audit somebody else. But I think everything's taken into account, like the amount of dollars that they process, and like Jared said, it's just to take the risk out of a department possibly failing because of something hadn't been looked at, and that's what that risk assessment terminology means. Is that correct? Is that an adequate explanation?
That is very accurate. It is a tool that's designed to look at the risk. Throughout the organization, there are several factors like the number of employees, excuse me, the size of the budget, the training offered to employees, the departments that are exposed to danger. The departments, there are several different categories. It's a short survey, 20 to 25 questions that look at those items at a 30,000-foot level for the organization and the audit committee to analyze to determine where they want to start and for us developing the work plan for the audit.
And in 25 years, we've had some departments that have never been audited.
That is very correct.
And so, yeah. Mr. Neesmith, and did I see? And I'll get you next.
To put a finer point on it, basically we're ranking the departments not about whether they are performing well or not performing well. It's if they aren't performing well, which departments present the most risk. So it's based on how much money, how many employees, what is their public face. So that's what it is how much focusing the work on what might be the most risky department. They're just exposed. It's not a function of whether the department's doing well or not. It's a function of how much risk there is that in the operation of that department. But I wanted to ask something, Commissioner Wright, if I could. You said auditing constitutional departments that have constitutional officers. Does that include the courts?
Well, we haven't got that far with it. We're working on getting the assessment tool finalized, and then the next thing in our January meeting, we'll be talking about just how broad do we send it out, because when we have the list that the audit committee looks at of the departments, and it's not just the departments, but it's also constitutional officers, special task force, was that another one? Anyway, different groups that have been audited, and making sure that we are getting the feedback we need from all groups. So that's part of the decisions we still need to make in the next
So to follow up, because I think this has been a sticky wicket in the past about whether or not we can audit the department of a constitutional officer, an elected officer, like the courts or the sheriff's department.
Well,
I'm just wondering if we can we really do that?
We've done it before.
Okay.
Madam
Yeah. Excuse me just a minute. I want to make sure that were you trying to be recognized, or were you trying to get my attention to somebody else?
I was trying to respond to this particular issue, and if I may, because it will answer Commissioner Neesmith's question.
Melissa, do you mind if he has some information today? Go ahead.
Well, I stand to be corrected by the attorney, but when I was chair of the audit committee, we can audit constitutional officers, but only if they request it. We cannot force them to undergo an audit. That's correct, is that not? So we have done it in the past. We had the clerk of courts, sheriff's department, I think, tax commissioner, but that was because they requested it. We do not have the authority to make them do it.
We were looking at the district attorney's office before we changed.
So it could be that we send them the survey, obviously, for a tool that they could use to follow up with us on it. We would not want to exclude them in the opportunity for this assessment. We would maybe be looking at it that way. But again, we haven't gotten to that point, and that's why this is on, why we want this to be officially time and effort spent by the Office of Operational Analysis, because of the value that it can be for all of us.
And Melissa, I'm going to call you next, but as a former constitutional officer, I'd just like to go on record as saying this is an excellent tool to use, because you get some independent eyes looking at your office, and it was very helpful to me. And I had I had two audits, one on the downtown office and one on the TAG office, and they were both very productive. Ms. Link.
Yeah, my question is kind of tangential to all this. So I have a question about the plans review process, which is mentioned in the agenda report. I'm just wondering if there's it's come to my attention that there's a significant loophole in the plans review process whereby the submittal of a plan supersedes the demolition moratorium. If someone submits a plan before they submit a demolition request, then that plan, is this correct? I'm wondering if somebody could get back to me with this,
Ms. Link,
this information.
I'm sorry, we moved on to another. I think that staff can respond to your request, but we're on a different item number now. We've finished that one.
No, this is, it's mentioned in the audit report, the plans review process, and Commissioner Wright sent us a copy of that process, and I'm just wondering if in the assessment of that process, if that loophole has been addressed.
We can talk to staff and get back with you on a specific answer.
Yeah, it just came to me as I was looking at the report.
And I apologize. I didn't realize that you were addressing that. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Bailey, you're too far to my right. My peripheral vision's not good enough.
I'd like to suggest to the chair of the audit committee that we go ahead and share that risk assessment with the rest of the commissioners. I think that everyone will look at it and find that this is a very good tool. When I first read it, I thought this is something that the department leadership will have to do a little soul searching and thinking about, and it doesn't take them a long time to get the numbers and the answers together, but I think it's a very useful tool for them and a very useful tool for us, and I think if you had a chance to look at it, you would see that. So I'm going to suggest we send that out if we could.
Okay. I will do that. At our last meeting, it was apparent that the manager had not seen it. And his just in one category, we talk about employee turnover, okay? And our brackets were by number. And I think he made a great observation that maybe we should do it by percentage. What percentage of your department had turnover? So once we get his feedback, just another set of eyes with that, and if it comes to that point of we will send it out so that'll keep us to where the feedback is at its highest level of it being at its review.
That's a great example of the tool, because if a department had an unacceptable turnover, then that might indicate that there's some problems that could be helped with an audit.
Right, and a percentage-based is probably better, but due to the
sense.
different number of employees within the departments.
Has everybody been recognized that wanted to speak to this? Okay, go to item number 12.
Can we put that on consent?
Ms. Smith, you got to speak up faster, Jerry.
I was cogitating. So, Commissioner Wright, could you tell me, when you send out this survey for the departments to do, are they required to do it?
We haven't gotten that far, but we would expect.
But a constitutional officer is not
that part.
required to do it. No, just required to do it. No,
Unified
so the
government.
constitutional officer isn't even required to do the survey.
That is correct. I meant the
yeah, I understand. I
unified
just wanted
government.
to make sure I understood that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll get to that point probably at the January meeting.
Okay, thank you.
May we put this on consent, please?
With all the discussion, are y'all sure you want it on consent?
Just one thing before you put it on consent. One of the things that, in these audits that we've had, when the constitutional officers have actually requested, most of the time it was dealing with the fact that they were looking for a way of getting personnel added to their office. And in many cases, once the audit was done, it proved that it was, that the personnel was needed. So as a result, it was beneficial. And I think we have one or two constitutional officers now that are constantly requesting new personnel. So it might behoove them to do the audit in order to see if what their request is, and they may end up getting it as a result. But many of them have gotten personnel as a result of having the audit done for them.
Anybody else? Do y'all want to put it on consent?
Yes.
Okay, with all that discussion, I just want to be sure. Okay, consent, Gene. Okay, item number 12 is the North Oconee Greenways, project number 25, construction contract award. Mr. Neesmith.
Well, we've reviewed this, and we've looked at the plans, and we've talked about it, so I'd like to see if we could put this on consent.
I just have some commentary about it. This is the section of our Greenway that intersects with the rest of our transportation network. It's the most visible intersection. It will intersect right there at Oconee Street, which is a major gateway corridor. And I'd like some feedback from staff to know if there's appropriate funding for the kind of gateway amenities that you really need at that kind of area. Whether it is kind of an artistic actual gateway or signage or historic markers or art, bike accommodations, the kind of, and also I want to reemphasize the need for a Greenway overlay zone along our Greenway as well as along our Firefly Trail. If we're going to see, real usage of these trails, we're going to need to make sure that the development along them is appropriate, that there's appropriate interfacing between new development and the trails so people can access them, so that they're not overshadowed by inappropriate development. Right now on that section, that gateway section, there's a 50-foot wall. We have a 40-foot wall that's going to kind of be overshadowing the gateway to our Firefly. And also considering some of the developments we've seen in Atlanta along the Beltline, and some of the affordable housing issues and the promises that have been broken along there, we really need to talk about a Beltway overlay zone that includes affordable housing mandates and incentives. So I just want to throw that out there, and if I can get some answers about the intentions for the kind of gateway amenities that are appropriate for this particular section of the Greenway, that would be great.
That's right.
Some of the amenities that are on the trail include river overlook, which are pretty elaborate items there. And on the map that's on 283, the little red section that includes a bridge going over the river to get that connectivity to campus, I'm hoping that little bridge segment, we could get a price tag on that and make that a priority for our SPLOST as far as talking about the different bridges and the costs of those that can help us with improving the connectivity. And since this is all in my district, I would also appreciate a consent agenda move once we're finished talking about it.
Yes, sir.
Just a comment about consent. I think we'd like to put on consent too. There is a little technicality. There's a history item number 24.
Oh, that's right.
You may want to look at it. We have not officially, as of yet today, had the green light, so to speak, from GDOT. So the agenda item is technically unfinished as of this evening. So,
okay. So we better
hopefully
leave it.
we'll get the permission from GDOT and we can move forward in the voting meeting in December, but there is a chance we may not.
And when we vote, hopefully we'll vote really quickly. Okay, great. Item number, I'm sorry, Kelly, I meant to call on you.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Just a couple of quick questions. So what we have in front of us is moving forward with the funding for segments 1, 3, and 5. Of course, segment 6 is complete already. Can you talk, Robert, about the timeline for funding of the other segments?
Well, in terms of segment, you mean like segment 2 and 4 in particularly?
Yeah.
Well, where we are with that is, with segment 2, we've been working with the cemetery board, and the cemetery has submitted kind of their list of items they'd like to have addressed and considered and so forth in order to make it more palatable for the Greenway section to go through the cemetery. So staff is reviewing that list right now, putting some costs associated with some of those questions and requests, and you'll be hearing about that information in the near future. I don't have a date quite yet as to when that'll happen, but we're going to have to talk about this with the full commission as to what the ask is, what the value of the easement, and how that relates to the value of the easement. And so that's a conversation we're going to have with the commission. In the other segment 4, and we're in process of working with public utilities in terms of obtaining the easements for both the water line, for the water and the trail, and that's just ongoing at this point. I don't know if I have an exact time frame.
Okay, that's helpful. And then the last point I would make, And Commissioner Link was asking about some design considerations, which I think in some places are absolutely warranted. Commissioner Harrod and I had an opportunity Monday to visit the Beltline in Atlanta with several staff members, and really saw some of the great work that's being done there, and I think was helpful in, I think, directing our eyes towards some of the opportunities that we have, not just on what we already know is planned or on the ground, but things that might not even be kind of on our radar yet. So it was really exciting. But I do want to make the specific point that our Greenway network plan is coming to us in the next few months. And so I think that would be the time to talk about those sort of design and gateway considerations that might look different than what we've had before so far.
Yeah. Further discussion? Okay, well, it can't be on consent, so we'll move on to item number 13, which Chris Dowd's so excited about. Anybody want to talk about that?
I'm sorry.
It's just the four-way stop on.
Oh, yeah. Let me speak to this real quick.
Okay.
I know Chris Dowd spoke about it. He lives right near there, and he alerted us to apparently crashes there are a pretty regular thing. And so I'm glad to see that staff followed through, and we're going to see a stop sign there, and that stop sign should help slow the traffic. Traffic on that stretch of Hancock it's a speedway. It's downhill and straightaway, and there have also been a lot of concerns about the Billups and Hancock intersection and some of the wrecks there. So I'm hoping there can be some investigation into that as well. So I'm happy to see this stop sign there, and I'm hoping it'll increase
Want to
safety.
put this on consent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Seems like it would be.
Yeah, okay,
Put on
good.
consent.
It goes to consent, Jean. Okay, now we'll go to H.T. Edwards Learning Center Safe Routes to School. And we have a request to condemn the right-of-way and easement at 1695 West Hancock. And I think we have all of our easements secured except that one. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor. This is the only parcel that's outstanding, and one of the reasons, I know the LRC, we talked at length recently about the connectivity of sidewalk sections. Mm-hmm. And if without the sidewalk section, it really is going to create we're really not accomplishing what our goal is create safe pedestrian passage. And so there'd be a gap in our sidewalk segment, really in quite a crucial area in this neighborhood.
Any discussion on this one?
I'll agree. I know folks are really looking forward to this sidewalk, and it's going to interconnect several amenities in that neighborhood, including H.G. Edwards, the church, the West Broad Market, and some existing sidewalks. So I'm happy to see this on consent.
Mr. Gertz?
I just want to say I'm looking forward to approval of this. The reality is we've got people from 6 weeks old to 60 years old using this campus, from the Early Learning Center to the Boys and Girls Club to the Athens Community Career Academy and Classic City High School to Athens Technical College. And the ability for people to get there safely is going to be very significant. And just in terms of the property in question, I want to point out that this has been a rental property since 1995, if not earlier. And it is a critical link, and I don't believe that a sidewalk on the edge of this property is going to do anything but really make that a more valuable property for both its tenants and for everybody in the neighborhood.
Ms. Dickerson?
Yeah, I guess because I'm not familiar with the specifics of this individual, I'm just kind of curious. It just says in the facts and issues under item 3, it just says the property owners met with staff to address his concerns and offered mitigating solutions. What were his concerns, and what are the mitigating solutions that staff has offered?
Commissioner, and that's a good question, and specifically it really comes down to screening for the house. I'm not screening, but improved fence line and vegetative buffer, so to speak. So there's an existing chain link fence, I believe, at that location. So there's discussions about a different type of fence. So we've talked to the owner about that, improving the fence line. There's also some shrubs and bushes that help screen the home and property, from the road. There's been discussions about how to preserve that and enhance that as well. So we've tried our best in order to address some of those types of concerns. But at the end of the day, we're at the point where the landowners just become non-responsive to our inquiries, and we're really just at that point where we have no other option.
Well, will the plan be to try to address those concerns by moving the fence or fixing the fence? Or, I mean, are we just going to go condemn it and put the sidewalk down, that's that? I mean, will there be some effort made to do that or not?
I think that depends on how this condemnation process moves forward.
Okay.
I mean, as to contrast that with some of the other condemnations that we're going through, and this is not a friendly condemnation at this point, so we'll just have to kind of see how that progresses.
Mr. Neesmith?
Well, and seeing this property, it looks abandoned. Is it abandoned?
It's actively used.
It's actively used. Yeah. And as far as screening, yeah, it's got screening. It's wild bushes and stuff. It's not maintained. Yeah. So, okay, I just want to make that comment. It would be an improvement to put a sidewalk in.
We aim to go above and beyond.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm all in favor of moving ahead on this, but I did have a question really for our attorney, because as our assistant manager has pointed out, this is not going to be a friendly condemnation, unlike the others. So what does that mean for us? Is it just going to take a longer period of time, or?
We will use what's called the declaration of taking method, because this is a right-of-way project, and so it will move fairly fast. Basically, the law allows the government to get an appraisal of the property, declare the property to be taken for that fair market value, and then the property owner can appeal the issue of value, both the value of the property taken and any consequential damages to the remainder. So the government will get the property pretty quickly, and then the question of value will be subject to ultimately a trial in Superior Court.
And how long was that process? 6 months, a year? I mean, ballpark.
The value phase of it, I mean, it could take a year to get to a jury trial.
Well, Bill, can I ask a procedural question? If we agree to allow condemnation, that doesn't preclude the owner from coming back and renegotiating and taking care of it before it gets condemned, does it?
Not at all. I mean, and that's what we would encourage. That's what we want to happen. But he's become unresponsive, and we really, the choice is either abandon that segment of the project or acquire the property through condemnation.
And I think Ms. Dickerson was probably expressing some concerns that I have about condemnation, that is something that I think we should use very rarely. But this is an issue of getting kids to and from school safely. And it's one of those rare occasions that I think the public interest far outweighs the private objection to this. So that's right.
Well, I have a question, just since we have 3 other property condemnations versus this being the right-of-way, and if you don't have the answer right now from the management, I was curious as to how many feet of right-of-way is there, and how many feet is it that we're needing to gain to accomplish the sidewalk? I just don't want people to think we're condemning the whole property to get the sidewalk in. It's just...
We're not condemning the property.
Just anyway, so if I can just learn the amount of right-of-way that's already there and how much more feet into the property we're gaining from this, that would help me. Thank you.
Do we have that, Robert?
Well, I mean, you can't really decipher it very well from the attachment, so we'll have to go back and get a good answer.
It is just enough to get the sidewalk. It's not condemning the property. And quite honestly, I'll tell you, that was one of the reasons I wanted someone from the Housing Authority to come and explain their process, because we've got 4 items here in a row. And it's something that's not real comfortable to do. Of course, the ones that the Housing Project are doing are friendly condemnations and are helping the property owners. So, any further discussion? I don't think maybe this needs to go on consent. What do y'all think?
I think Allison's question should be answered.
Yes.
Yeah, if we get that in email, then that way if somebody's asking me about it, I have some of the math to go with it. I'm okay putting it on consent.
Okay, let's go to consent then. Okay. We'll go to item number 18, which is Legislative Review Committee report on animal control. And that's...
We're going to discuss the three Housing Authority condemnations.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Any discussion on, we can talk all three of them together as far as discussion. Ms. Ryan?
I'll just attest that West Henderson property it's in rough shape. There have been a lot of problems at that location. There's been some dumping and, possible vagrancy, and it's a great little chunk of land and would make a great affordable home. And there's already some Habitat houses on that street, and I look forward to seeing another house there.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, well, item number 15, are y'all okay for consent? 16? 17? Okay, those go on consent, Jean.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
I just want to make sure, Bill, can we put those items on the consent agenda, or do they have to remain on the regular agenda?
For eminent
Those
domain of the housing
condemnations.
authority.
The only issue, and I guess I'd need to ask Mr. Warrens, is if the state law requires a separate hearing for the property owners to appear. I mean, I would suggest just in the interest of due process to make them separate items on the discussion.
Well, I didn't mean to make them one item. I meant just to put them on, yeah.
I think discussion would be best for all
Okay.
four of those items.
Okay. We'll go to our Legislative Review Committee, and I believe that's you, Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have in front of us tonight kind of a returning item that LRC came to the full commission regarding a few months ago. We made an interim step forward in the committee process and wanted to inform the full mayor and commission where we were and get some feedback and input about this process of electronic confinement for animals. As everybody knows here behind the rail, and many members of the public do, there have been concerns in some neighborhoods about the efficacy of electronic confinement. And there also were concerns about the way that that was dealt with or not dealt with, honestly, in our code. So what happened when this item returned to the LRC last month was that the bulk of the text that people saw before them before was retained. And so what that text does is define electronic confinement and verifies that electronic confinement, in fact, does qualify as confinement, that essentially an electronic fence would have the same effect in terms of our ordinance as a physical fence would, a chain link fence or a wooden fence or so forth. It also requires that signage be present where there is electronic confinement. So an individual approaching the property would recognize that this is a property with that kind of electronic confinement in place, so that they would see that. So whether that was the mailman or a delivery person or a passerby out walking or somebody biking. It would also require that no animal, and I'm reading from the text, no animal which has been classified or is currently being reviewed for classification as a dangerous, potentially dangerous, or vicious dog pursuant to state or local law may be confined by means of electronic confinement system. The piece that was added within the committee system last month was to review the functionality of this 12 months after approval, should it be approved by the full mayor and commission. So that's what's happened on the committee level, and just want to make sure that everybody understands that. So I'm speaking there as committee chairperson. Now I'm going to speak now as Kelly Gertz, District 9 Commissioner. And I will say that, as an individual, I think the discussion that we had as a full body a couple of months ago was instructive in the way that often our conversations can be, in which they provide a new facet of understanding or a new lens through which to think about an issue. And as the discussion moved toward these questions of public health and public safety, I mean, it became evident to me in consideration that the value of public health and avoiding, I think as Andy phrased it, that first bite was more important than the question of, can you maintain an electronic fence that would be viewed as parallel with a physical fence. And so as an individual, I won't be supporting this, but I do need to at least fairly represent to you what happened on the committee system process.
I just want to note that some neighborhoods, in historic districts, often they do not allow front yard fences, and often in these historic districts, their backyards are extremely limited in size, so folks only have the opportunity to confine their animals via electric fence. I mean, I can think of one property on Boulevard that has precisely that condition. So this electronic fence option is the only option for some properties. And so I support it, and I kind of wonder if maybe we need to, if there are folks that are uncomfortable with it, maybe there needs to be some other level of vetting for animals that could qualify for that kind of confinement. And I did mention that the AKC does have something called a Canine Good Citizen program, and other cities do use that as kind of a level of qualifying that allow certain animals to, participate in certain community activities or have access to certain, public facilities or whatever. So that could be a compromise solution where, animals that are confined by these electronic fencing, we might require some extra level of vetting for them if there is a discomfort with it.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I guess the most important thing is that the data that we were provided isn't really sufficient to say that this is a really big problem. And I guess I think back to like when we talk about crashes of cars at intersections, we look at criteria, we determine, deaths at intersections, elevate things. So one of the things that Commissioner Sims suggested that I don't know that it was, maybe it wasn't here clear, but was that we look at this in a year. We review the incidences and the severity of the instances that may occur. And I'll echo what Commissioner Link said, and this was brought up in the meeting by myself, that in my neighborhood in particular, we have covenants that supersede or are in addition to what the mayor and commission allows in the county and zoning, and we don't allow fencing in the front yard, chain link fencing, and we do have issues with backyard fencing because of some of the properties and whatnot. And one of the things that I hope we consider when we look at this in another year is maybe consider, it'd be a neighborhood by neighborhood type of action or a zoning action, a zoning restriction if it's a bigger issue in town or in areas where there's, RS-25s or some smaller areas. I mean, we have 5 or 6 acre lots where we are. It's not a huge issue. And a lot of people do have them, do have the electronic fences and I guess it's incumbent upon the people who have those, just like people who drive cars, to operate them appropriately and train people appropriately. And, when it crosses that line, that's when it becomes, civil matter. People have to deal with that. But I guess one of the things I thought about and actually just rereading over this in the last couple of days was we do have opportunities, I mentioned this earlier, speed humps. If a certain percentage of the neighborhood says they want to participate in it, then maybe that's an option. Maybe that's a way to deal with this instead of blanketing across the whole county, because there are different areas that it's not an issue. It's not as big of an issue, and there may be other restrictions because of where they live. So just some things to think about as we move forward.
Jerry was next.
Jerry, then I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, because I don't think y'all really care that much. Jerry, go ahead.
Jerry,
yes, you were first, I believe, and then Jared.
all right. So I have the purpose of fencing isn't only to protect us from being bitten by a dog. It's also to protect the dog from being run over by a car or whatever, or even just menacing people or just digging up people's gardens. So the problem I have is that it says that anyone convicted of a violation shall be prohibited from confining anyone. The violation of 414B shall be prohibited from confining any domestic animal by means of an electronic confinement system for 6 months. 414B simply says a violation is to attack or act so as to menace pedestrians or other persons using public ways on the property. So we're not protecting the animal here. The animal can escape the electronic fence over and over and over again, and we can't tell the owner that he can't confine the animal with that electronic fence anymore. The animal can escape and just be a pest to people who and it says on the property of another, that's fine. So I don't think this is enough. I think if that animal continues to escape that electronic fence, even though he's not a menace on public right-of-ways, that we need to tell that person they can't do that anymore. They can't use a fence for that animal. So I don't think this is strong enough.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought that was our intent, that if the animals were escaping and they were cited, the owners were cited, then they would not be allowed to have confinement with just the electric fence. I seem to recall that as the intent of the committee. But I want to mention one other thing, and I know that Commissioner Gertz eloquently stated that he doesn't support it that much, and I know that Commissioner Harrod is going to give us some good reasons why he doesn't support it, because he did last time. I just want to mention that, in a way, there's a couple of other issues that have been brought up. First of all, there are people who cannot afford to put up a fence. Fences can be very expensive. The electronic system are not that expensive, $150, $200, whereas a fence, I put up a fence in my yard, it was $4,500. So basically, you have an animal that either, because the owner can't afford a true fence, might be roaming anyway, or might be confined inside the house all day, which is not very healthy for the dog, or they might be tethering the dog, which is against our laws. But for the health of the dog, it's much better for them to be able to be in a larger space and still secure, so they're not being run over by cars. And I think that the electric fence opportunities, it's a good alternative. And yes, there are some dogs who will find ways to get out of it, but you got to train the dogs to use the system, and just like we've got to train dogs to do other things. So I just wanted to bring up that there's a benefit to the dogs, and there's a benefit to people who can't afford a fence to keep their dogs in a more humane way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess I have several things that I would want to say. I will not be supporting this option. I agree with Commissioner Neesmith. I don't think it is stringent enough. On the question of the issue of animals such as this, at the end of the day, our primary goal as a government is to protect the public health and safety. And yes, I understand that there may be some properties where it's more convenient to have a dog kept in the front yard than in the backyard. That's really not my concern. My concern is the public health and safety of the citizens or the residents. So there are lots of apartments where you're not allowed to have an animal. These are decisions, these are choices that people make when it comes to where they choose to live and where they choose not to live. In terms of the question of covenants, I understand that certain neighborhoods have certain covenants. Our ordinances, Mr. Attorney, override covenants. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if we pass an ordinance, a covenant is not, our ordinance will supersede any covenants. If I look at...
A covenant can be more strict by contract than an ordinance can.
Mm-hmm.
The ordinance can't negate the covenant.
But we don't endorse covenant or enforce covenants.
No. And the government does not enforce covenants, correct.
So as I look at the language here, I'm just going to look at three changes just briefly. So on page 318, under section 4-1-2, so where it says, the language has been changed under confined. It says, it would now read, confined means kept within an electronic confinement system, building, pen, or fenced area or other structure built to prevent escape by a domestic animal. That seems to me, as Commissioner Neesmith pointed out, not only does it stop, or maybe he didn't point it out, but maybe not only does it stop an animal leaving a property, but it seems to be weaker because it then also prevents another animal coming onto the property under what currently we have. And as I read the code, if we change the language from dog to domestic animal, does that mean that we're going to have people chasing cats and birds and all sorts of other animals around their property because they're potentially in violation of this? That's a question for our attorney, I guess. And I know it's already, a lot of people don't understand this, but it's already illegal to let your cat off your property, according to our code. So you don't have to answer that right this second, but it's something I would like to be pondered. The second issue is it says under the electronic confinement system, an electronic confinement system shall not be considered an adequate means of confinement if the system is improperly installed, malfunctioning, in disrepair, damaged, switched off, or otherwise deactivated or non-operational. So if an animal, if a dog with a collar on gets off the property, is it our burden of proof to prove that the system was malfunctioning rather than the dog was just simply bloody-minded and ran off the property and decided to take that half a second of electronic jolt? How do we prove that the problem was with the system and not with the dog simply bolting?
The way it would work, as I understand it, is the animal control officer would ask the owner of the system to demonstrate that it works or not when the animal control officer comes there. And then,
which may be a day, a couple of days after the animal has bolted the property. So we have no real way of knowing, I think, that the system, as it's presented to be operating when the animal control officer shows up, is how it was actually operating when the dog left the property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the third question I had, on the next page, under section 414, where it says, where are we looking here? Pending an adjudication for any citation for a violation of this subparagraph B, the person cited shall be required to maintain the dog in a proper enclosure as defined in this chapter. Any person convicted of violating this subsection, in addition to penalties provided for in section 4.1.14, shall be required to maintain the dog in a proper enclosure as defined in this chapter. It seems to me that that's kind of a catch-22 situation, because if somebody's got an electronic fence, maybe I'm just not understanding this properly, but if somebody's got an electronic fence with a dog with a collar and the dog escapes, we are saying that the owner of that dog has to keep that dog in a proper confinement, which would require either to maintain them in the house at all times or to build a fence, right? Isn't that a catch? Isn't that a catch-22?
Mr. Harrod, I believe a proper enclosure, as defined in this chapter, is an electronic fence, which has already failed.
Exactly.
No, that's...
Bill might have the specific code section, but a proper enclosure is different than an electronic confinement system. So maybe Bill can talk about that a little bit more. So basically, and you are correct, I mean, if you were not allowed to use an electronic confinement system for a period of 6 months, the homeowner really has couple options. One is to not have a dog anymore, or number two, confine it within a fence or a structure that would not allow, or within the home, not an electronic fence.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? One quick observation I'll make is it does not keep animals from coming into the yard either. So, and I don't really know very much about what Ms. Link brought up, but it sounds like something that would be very worthwhile looking into when we review this at the end of the year. So if you could get us some information, that'd be great. Mr. Kurtz.
I do want to kind of offer some of the flavor of the committee discussion through the kind of two iterations. You know, in discussion with David Fluck, the Central Services Director, and Patrick Reeves, the Animal Control Director, the goal was to find sort of manageable processes. And there are a lot of things that we could do. And I mean, I think Commissioner Dickerson's sort of notion of kind of a parallel with the neighborhood traffic management system is sort of a good idea, sort of in isolation, but the challenge for animal control officers is that they have to continually monitor the entire county, and they have to have sort of means of operation that, you know, basically one or two people on a truck can handle. And so that's why some of the more complex systems, which, you know, if funds and staffing were absolutely available, you know, we might have pursued, simply didn't get any traction in committee or with staff members. And then finally, I'll just say, I mean, I think like Andy noted, the right to own an animal isn't an absolute right. And I mean, it's contingent upon lots of things. And while I know that animals, you know, not only deserve decent care themselves and can be comforting to people, I think both those things have to exist in both an isolated and broader social environment in which they can be done well. And some properties just shouldn't be properties that potential pet owners should move into.
That's right.
Yeah, in processing some of the different comments that were being made, it might be that we need to add that a repeat escapee or witnessing and information about a repeat escapee literally means that electric fence is not working properly by virtue of training or the dog type thing. And I think with a vet school here in town that we have some really highly, whether people wanting to get in vet school or already in vet school, these people know how to train their dogs, know how to have this kind of fencing so that it works. And they might be the type that would never leave their dog out there by itself. So they know another dog's not going to come in. But then you can get the person who doesn't have that background time and effort spent training the dog to where that electric fence is not going to be working properly because they might leave it all day. So it might be that we need to add something in there that describes not that it has to bite somebody to be not available for that as confinement. And then it maybe also for some of the areas that don't have fencing, it might be that people want to get a waiver from their, what do you call the neighborhood association? Covenants, that if there's playground equipment, that they should get a waiver that they could put fencing around the playground equipment so that if there's the concern of a dog coming into a child play area, there maybe we could make some modifications, or there can be ways that people can have fencing. I don't know how those work, but there's more work to be done, and it might be in a commission defined option coming forward or the review in a year. But it's very complex, and as we all know, once you start talking about pets, there's a lot of options out there, good examples and bad.
Well, I think Kelly's a good example. When you have a baby, it changes everything. That's right.
My big fear is that we already have people out there who are using this system, and they live in neighborhoods where on properties where they're not allowed to put a fence up, a front yard fence up. They maybe have lived there for 30 or 40 years, and they may have, 2 or 3 dogs that are intimate members of their family. I mean, I know how that is. My little dog is the center of my universe. And if I was told suddenly that, I can't keep her because my property isn't suitable for her to use the electric fence that might confine her, that would be pretty devastating. And are we going to ask people to move out of their homes or give up their dogs? That's the big question. That's the big concern I have. And, if there's an ability to compromise on this where, there is the fear that some dogs might not be appropriate for this kind of confinement. They might not stay put. The ones that I know out there that use it, those dogs do stay put. And if they were to escape, they're not vicious dogs. But maybe there needs to be some system by which, you get a special license to be allowed to use this kind of confinement, and your dog goes through a special kind of training so it's assured that they're staying put and that they're not vicious. If we have to go through that additional set of vetting, then maybe that's what we need to pursue, because there are certainly properties already out there that are using this kind of confinement that cannot put up fences, that don't have backyards, that confine their dogs in front yards through that electric fencing, and they're not, are we going to have to change our historic district guidelines to allow front yard fences?
Mike, I don't think you've spoken to this issue.
I haven't. I was trying
Then
to
I'll-
purposely
then we'll
stay
come back to
quiet
you.
on this one, too.
It's hard, isn't it?
You know, and I agree with Commissioner Link, except for all the regulation stuff that you added on there at the end. I don't know that I agree with that. But, so at any rate, I think giving it a year to see what happens with it is a good option. And I think we're all on neighborhood listservs where we, each day we see a report of a dog that's loose. And I don't know if the dog has been in an enclosure or in a fence. I remember this dog I had growing up, his name was Mutt, and he was in a fence. And Mutt never ran faster than when he got out of that fence, and he got out of it a lot. But we'd be driving down the street, and my dad go, there goes Mutt, and chasing us. So at any rate, Mutt was in a fence. Mutt got out of the fence, and I think that happens. And I think giving this a year to review and see what the numbers are when they come back to us is just a prudent decision.
Well, even if there are no numbers, I still think we need to look at it again in a year.
Right.
You know, if there have been no incidents, because it will give, I think it'll give people a lot of time to give it some thought. You know, so.
And anytime we can put Andy Harrod in a proper enclosure, I'm all in favor of that, too.
There's no such thing.
See if he gets out.
So just a couple other things I guess to think about, and because of where I live, it's not a problem, but obviously it's a problem in Commissioner Harrod's area, perhaps Hammy's area, and Commissioner Links or Wrights. But you know, I think, you know, we think about, you know, innocent until proven guilty. Okay, I mean, just because a dog gets out, you know, doesn't
That's
mean.
for
I mean,
people.
I'm sorry.
I was just teasing. I said that's for people.
Well, but again, why? I mean, are we
teasing.
going to put something in place where there isn't a problem? And that's what we've asked for, is the data and where is it happening geographically too, to sort of chart and see where are we having incidents of this, because it doesn't make sense to one size fits all policy that goes across the board when it's not an issue in some areas. Maybe because people are more prudent about training their dogs. Maybe because you know, that they have a system that's better than another. I don't know. I mean, maybe. Who knows? But I'm concerned about it just being a blanket across the board for everybody, because it does specifically impact a lot of neighborhoods out in my area where they don't allow fencing in the front. And I can name at least 5 or 6 people that I know that have those and are very, very careful to make sure their animals are kept safely inside and confined with that you know, with that underground fence. And I don't know that of any of those 5 I think of that I've ever heard that they've ever had a problem with that. So, you know, again, it's we're punishing a few people for the action. I mean, a lot of people for the actions of a few, and that concerns me. So,
yes, sir.
Here's the unintended consequence. We're going to make electronic fencing an acceptable confinement system, which means that more and more people will use it as opposed to using a fence. And so the problem, if there is one, is going to intensify. And the problems, it'll be longer than a year before we see this. But we're now saying you don't have to put up a fence. You can use an electronic fence. When the person has the property to do it, has the money to do it, but they don't have to do it now. So I'm concerned about that as well.
Well, I'll say one more thing. My concern is something that Mr. Harrod has expressed, and it's avoiding that first bite. Because, as I've said before, it seems like every time you hear about a dog attacking a child and disfiguring it or killing it, it's always that dog was never a problem until it attacks that child. And that's what concerns me, because I've seen the electronic fences fail, as I've told y'all before. Depends on the dog, and there's no perfect solution, but I think whatever we pass, or if we pass this, we do need to look at it again in a year. Think about it some more. So, what's your pleasure? Anybody want to talk anymore? Okay, we got one more item. Okay, item number. Oh, did I miss somebody?
I said consent.
Oh,
Move on.
okay. Item number 19, which is our goals and objectives. Would anybody like to talk about this? We've talked about it a lot. But, yeah. Mr. Neesmith.
I sent you all a suggested addition to this, which had to do with our liquor license. And a couple hours ago, I sent you an email which had a letter from a constituent who runs a small restaurant on the Athens West corridor, describing the financial situation that the cost of our liquor license is causing her. In fact, she's considering moving to Oconee County. because she needs to have a liquor license in order for people to come and eat at her small restaurant. And she can't afford it. The liquor license in Oconee County for all kinds of pouring is about $3,000, and ours is about $6,000, and then add another $600 for Sunday sales. Our liquor license prices seem to be designed for the dominating thing in our tapestry of bars and restaurants, which are the bars downtown, who have no problem because they're on some weekends, I'm told, they're doing $40,000 worth of liquor. This person wouldn't do $40,000 worth of liquor in a year. So we need to figure out a way, if we want our businesses to prosper. One size does not fit all when it comes to the price of a liquor license. Atlanta Highway is becoming a small restaurant, large restaurant center. It's become a big part of what Atlanta Highway is about. If we're discouraging the small restaurant or making it impossible for small restaurant to profitably exist, then we're defeating ourselves. We're hurting ourselves. And having Sunday sales as a separate cost, as Commissioner Wright has pointed out, is just ridiculous. What's the difference? You can look at why do we have these liquor licenses and why do we charge this? Well, one thing is to have revenue, and other is to recover the cost of us administering and the consequences of liquor being served. One of those is police enforcement. Small restaurants don't have that problem. The police enforcement issues it just don't occur, or they're very, very rare. Downtown, they're not rare at all. We're having to enforce the law on the streets because liquor is being poured in the establishments. So I really want us to add to our goals and objectives, asking staff to take a look at a tiered approach that could be based upon sales, or it could be based upon some other criteria to tier our liquor licenses, to combine our Sunday sales into the liquor license, and to make our liquor our economic environment more attractive to the small restaurant owner. And so I'd like to add that to this, our goals and objectives. And I think this is very, very important.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harrod, then I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll just be quick. I expressed this in email, and I'll express it now. I completely agree with what Commissioner Neesmith just said. I think it's a really good idea, and I agree with him that a lot of our alcohol-type things seem to be related to bars downtown, which is fine. They're important to our community. They bring us a lot of revenue. But I think also for many restaurants, if you don't serve alcohol, you're not going to make it. And so I think this is something that could be really helpful to some of those small businesses, small restaurants. So I fully support this.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of volume-based fees, but I would like to say that comparing our fees to Oconee County fees, that's not comparing apples to oranges. Athens-Clarke County provides a lot more services and has a lot more costs, like you were using as an example, Commissioner Neesmith, the enforcement downtown. So the idea of volume-based fees is not necessarily a bad one, but I just want to say that our licenses, the price of our licenses shouldn't really be compared to Oconee County because they're very different types of counties.
Before you say something, can I make a suggestion? Rather than amending our goals and objectives, I've already asked our manager to ask our finance department to do an analysis for us of hours related to other communities and specifically Oconee counties. This is something we handle separately. It doesn't necessarily need to be a goal and objective. Once we get some data, we can put it in committee and I think maybe deal with it better than adding it to goals and objectives.
So. I support that, Madam Mayor. Thank you. Okay. But I just want to respond to Commissioner Bailey. Perhaps to us, it's apples and oranges, but to a person who's opening a restaurant or has one open, It isn't apples to oranges. It's $3,000 versus over $6,000. And that's what they look at.
Ms. Link.
Commenting on our goals and objectives overall, the whole process, which I think was a good process, but I want to make it clear that, as came up in the discussion, that the initiatives that were presented as part of our goals and objectives for next year were primarily staff produced, and there's been no opportunity for us as elected officials to propose our own initiatives or policies, specifically policies, and policy may not even include much budget consequence. So I'd just like to, come up with some way forward by which we can influence next year's budget process or issues that we, as elected officials, might want to pursue next year can be incorporated into this budget process, and we can have some real discussion about policy needs.
Anybody else? Okay, if not, let's go.
I just want to support Commissioner Link's suggestion. I mean, we are in a position, I'm not criticizing the process. It's a greatly improved process, but it feels one way right now. It feels that what we're doing is responding to suggestions from the staff, and we're not getting the adequate opportunity to provide our own input into the goals, and more importantly, the policies. And as I said, Madam Mayor, I know you're responsible for the agenda, and no policy is going to get onto the agenda unless you want it there, and I respect that. But it seems to me like we need to be giving the mayor some ideas about some things that we support worth consideration. Otherwise, it's just private meetings and private discussions, and which work, but I think we need to formalize.
You just did it tonight with the liquor license.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Herbert's first, I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to clarify a little bit, because I think the characterization of the process is not entirely correct. I certainly agree that I think we need to have a retreat-type environment in which we discuss policy matters, and I have no disagreement with that whatsoever. But I think it's a little disingenuous to say that the Mayor and Commission have not played a role in these budget goals, because they come directly out of the day-long retreat that we had back at the beginning of the year. So whilst I completely agree that it would be nice also to have a retreat that's focused simply on policy issues, I don't think it's correct, and I don't want the people out in TV land to think that the budget goals that we have here have not had the benefit and the influence of the elected officials behind the rail.
Madam Mayor, I want to say you're right, Andy. They are responding to the goals and objectives that we set, the big picture things, and you're right about that.
I'm sorry, let's don't get in it. We did this in a retreat. It's Mr. Bailey's turn now.
Just want to.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too would like to say that I feel that the list we were presented was a very good list, and Commissioner Harrod's correct. That was a list of responses to some earlier goals and strategies. But there were also ones that just came completely out of the blue. They weren't bad ones, but they came from staff and were basically staff stating what they thought we needed for this department or that department. Like I said, not a bad list, but I did feel like there wasn't an opportunity, and I stated that during the retreat a couple of times. I think that there should have been more opportunity for us to add items as well. And I agree with Commissioner Harrod about the policy part. I think and that was discussed and agreed to. I think that we are going to have some sort of future policy meeting.
Well, one of the things that I would like to make clear is on our goals and objectives. If you look at this sheet that y'all don't have it printed out, I do, but we came up with broad categories like healthy, livable, sustainable Athens-Clarke County. Then we came down and listed support human and cultural development, foster environment to decrease energy. We came up with some specific issues under each one of these broad categories, and then the budget actions were things that our staff came back to us with. So it's definitely a commission-driven process in my mind. And we accepted some suggestions by our staff more enthusiastically than others, and those got ranked. And so I think it was a commission-driven, good process. Not that it can't be improved, and not that we won't, but I think it was whoever said that they want people out there in TV land to know that this was our process, not staff process. So. Ms. Link.
I'll agree that, you know, the initiatives that staff brought forward met those kind of broad goals that we set. But there are also initiatives that some of us might have in mind that might also help meet those goals. And they might be specific initiatives or they might be policy oriented. And I really feel strongly that we need to have, and it could just happen at a work session, you know, it could be a 45-minute, hour-long discussion at a work session. I think that would do the job, because I know that some of us have items already in mind, and they are items that have come up, you know, throughout the year in discussions and in committees. And that might be all it takes, is simply adding a policy and new budget initiatives item to a soon work session. And I really think that kind of discussion should be very, very public and accessible to the public so the public can attend.
And these were open meetings. So. Anybody else before we go home? Okay. Y'all want to leave it on? Leave it on discussion. Okay. Good night, everybody.